Good afternoon and welcome to Engage Every Family, the 5 Simple Principles. This is session 3 of a 5-part series where we're providing an overview of the book Engage Every Family, written by Dr. Steven Constantino. So Dr. Steven Constantino was a teacher, principal, superintendent, state interim superintendent, and he's now a professor at William and Mary College of Education. So on the left, you'll see an image of the second edition of his book, Engage Every Family. And on the right, you'll see his original logic model, which depicts those 5 simple principles, and that there is a process to be engaged in to really effectively enhance family engagement within a system or even individually within a classroom. So my name is Caroline Rossing. I am a Family School Partnerships Coordinator at CESA 3 in Fenimore, Wisconsin. I work within a Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction project called Wisconsin Statewide Parent Educator Initiative, or WISPE. So I also have our website linked in here, and I'd encourage you to go out and explore there. We have numerous resources and a lot of information about special education and family engagement. And today we're going to be joined by Jim Addison and Molly Thielen. So these two individuals are literacy specialists at CESA 3 in Fenimore. They aren't able to join us live today, but I did meet with them earlier, and I have a great recording of information for everyone to listen to. So Dr. Constantino starts off with 3 concepts, kind of underlying concepts in his book to be thought about, kind of foundational pieces to think about as you're working on enhancing family engagement. The first one is to reflect on why families would choose your school. So we asked the question, if families truly had a choice as to where their children would receive an education, would they choose your district, your school, your classroom? If your answer to this question is yes, then you must ask yourself the logical follow-up question, why? Why would families choose your school? Why would families choose your classroom or you as a teacher? And what is so compelling about your product that a customer, being a family, would choose it over a growing list of options? So when we enter into this activity with individuals, many times they'll say, I have some families that I know for sure would say, yes, we love your school, we love your classroom, we would choose your school. But there's also families that we're not sure about whether or not they would choose our school or my classroom. So it's those families that Dr. Constantino speaks about as well. And here's where we need to begin doing some outreach and building relationships with those families to understand their needs and what would compel them to choose your school or your classroom. So that kind of brings us to the next underlying foundational idea or component that he brings forward, is to consider family circumstances for each and every child. So we've all heard those phrases, those kids, that neighborhood, those parents, or I know all about that family. I had the older brother in my class. And he challenges us to think about our assumptions. What are we assuming about that family or that student? And then challenging our assumptions by asking, what more do I need to know about that family? What do I currently know and what don't I know, but I need to know more about? So really considering those circumstances of each and every child in your classroom, gaining understanding about their circumstances so you can best support each in your classroom. And the third idea or kind of underlying component he brings forward is working with the hard to reach. So he goes on to say, we have labeled families hard to reach when they don't seem to conform to our perceptions of our standard communication protocols. However, they can be reached. It just takes knowing how and the willingness to make the necessary changes. So he brings forward the fact that organizations, including school districts, have communication protocols. They typically have a communication plan, a communication loop, communication platforms. And he asked the question, does that really work for all families? Many times we think that it should, but it may not. And then he's speaking to how can we address that and how can we reach those families that aren't able to use the communication protocols we have in place. It may be sending a text rather than an email. It may be making a phone call rather than using that Skyward platform. And it might be also knowing who that family is comfortable interacting with or communicating with at the school. Many times families have someone they feel comfortable with and utilizing that person to build communication around and back into your classroom. He also realizes that it may not be the communication platform, right? There could be other reasons families are not engaging, and we can label them hard to reach, unreached, or disengaged. And that's what he speaks to here in the second part on the slide. And the need, he brings forward the need to find out what that negative catalyst is for their disengagement. Have they had some bad experiences with the school in the past? I mean, it could be a variety of things, but really, again, the need to build a relationship with families, get to know them and understand them to find out why they have been or seem to have been disengaging with the district or school. So as we look a little bit closer at these 5 simple principles, you'll see the logic model again on the right-hand side of the slide. So the 5 simple principles that Dr. Constantino brings forward are: 1, a culture that engages every family, and we've already had a session about that. Also, communicating effectively and developing relationships, which I kind of spoke to a little bit already, another very important step in the process. And today we're talking about build family efficacy, and we're really going to talk about what does that mean and how can we do that. And then at future sessions, which will be taking place this Thursday, May 8th, and then next Tuesday on the 13th, will be engage every family in decision making and engage the greater community. One resource I'd like to bring forward here is a survey with statements on it that you could utilize in your school, in your organization, or even individually to identify where you're kind of at right now. And it covers things like the family feels welcome in the school. It talks about values, beliefs. It talks about communication, talks about reaching out to the community. So it's got a nice variety of statements that align to the 5 principles that, again, that either you as an individual or your staff within your organization or school could take and identify kind of where you're at now. And then maybe if you enhance your family engagement, implement some strategies, take it again at a later date and see if that's changed. So that's the first resource I have available for you today. So let's dive into this principle 3, build family efficacy. And what does Dr. Constantino say about this, or what does he mean by building family efficacy? Well, he states that families are recognized as essential members of the learning team for each student, and their participation is welcomed, valued, and encouraged by the school. The school understands that families are important and influential resources because they know their children best. We talk so much about that whole child piece, getting to know the whole child and supporting the whole child. And families know so much about their children and how they function in the community and at home that information is so valuable to being able to support the child in the classroom. So under each of the principles, Dr. Constantino provides objectives or kind of, what does that look like? So his first objective under principle 3 is the school makes a conscious effort to educate families in how to play a proactive role in the learning life of their child throughout their child's school career. Very important that the school supports families to be able to be proactive. And it all starts with communicating with them effectively, building relationships, understanding their needs, their strengths, and how they can be that proactive role in the learning of their child. Here I've got a couple resources. I won't open those, but the PTA Guides to Success identify what's being learned at every grade level around reading and math. Very helpful to families and others to know, okay, what is my child supposed to be learning or gaining skills around in the classroom at this specific age or grade level. Then I've got PBS Kids. PBS Kids has a wide variety of resources for learning at home. And this is where educators could also provide examples for families of what they can do at home to reinforce concepts that are being taught in the classroom. His next objective, or what does it look like, is the school is committed to the academic socialization of families, and to that end develops and deploys strategies that encourage and support family engagement with the learning in all classrooms. So this is about connecting that family engagement to learning. Here I have another resource for you. This is from Parent Powered. Talks about academic socialization, primarily at the middle and high school. It's a great read. So please take the time to take a look at that. But on the next slide, I have just a little bit more about academic socialization. So a definition for academic socialization is that research defines academic socialization as how parents use their own educational beliefs and expectations to provide messages to their children to help navigate or influence their academic success and development. So that's the first place of learning, right? At home. And it's so important that family members are supportive of the academics, of the learning of the child. And we, as either other family members, agency professionals, or educators, can help families to develop that ideal academic socialization, really talking positively about school, having high expectations for their children, and that sort of thing. So this definition comes from Hill and Tyson, and they did a lot of research work around parent involvement, especially at the middle school level, and its impact on student success. So the next objective that he talks about, or what does it look like, is families participate in the development of the student's learning plan, help monitor and assess progress, and provide support for their child's learning. So we'll be talking more about this in a little bit, about monitoring and assessing progress. And this again would be so important to build that relationship with the family so you could talk to them about how they could do that, how they could share information about learning at home or in the community that would help the educator in the classroom understand the child's progress better. But I did link in a resource here from Baylor University. It's literacy as a family, those daily tips, because we're going to be talking with Jim and Molly in a minute here, or hearing from them in a minute about literacy. And literacy can just show up in our daily living, right? And there's so many opportunities to support children in literacy just throughout the day and just the daily routines. And that's just another way families can participate in the child's learning plan. So I won't open it, but take a look at that. It's got a lot of good information on it. And then the fourth point he brings forward is that families suggest learning strategies and experiential possibilities and use their local knowledge, personal skills, assets, and networks in ways that support the school's program. So here I'd like to bring forward this best practice document. Dr. Constantino, for each principal, develops these best practice descriptions. And then what WISPE, the project that I worked for, did is we provided and developed some best practice examples. You'll see that these examples center around students with IEPs, but they certainly could apply to any student in any classroom. So under his first objective, Constantino talks about that best practice description as being some things that I bolded here as being all school staff believe families are integral to student performance and success, and as such, design student instruction with families in mind, thinking about family circumstances, their ability to support their child's learning. Some examples that Wispy brought forward are educators seek family input in order to provide learning kits, fun learning games, and activities that are engaging. And also that our school encourages students and their families to share their ideas and feelings about learning and their school experiences during parent-teacher conferences or at any other time they're interacting with the teacher. Another thing Constantino brought forward here was that collaborative cultures exist with each and every family are inclusive of important and trusting relationships between school staff and families. As I said, in the first two sessions, we talked about culture, the importance of that, as well as relationships. And he brings that forward again in this principle around family efficacy. Some things that Wispy developed as examples would be educators invite families to share evidence and insights about progress. School staff hold ongoing conversations with families. We talk a lot about the need for that ongoing communication with families. We speak to the fact that school programs and activities for families focus on making connections to that student learning and help families support those improved academic and functional outcomes for their child. And then lastly, here, Constantino, I bolded this statement: the school system and its other component schools use a variety of school and community resources to ensure that every family understands what is expected academically from each child. And here, Wispy had highlighted or developed, I should say, an example. Educators explain to the family what progress monitoring tool is used and what data will be collected, and explaining that to them in family-friendly terms so they really understand that data. So this resource is something that you could go out to and utilize more pieces of it if you'd like to. A lot of great information in how to support families to support their child's learning. So thinking about supporting the efficacy of families in your school or your organization, or maybe as another family friend, right? Think about, do you know how families in your school district or organization define their role and what their beliefs are about their self-efficacy to support their children's learning? And if needed, how can you help shift their beliefs? So that might be the first step is once you've developed a relationship, a trusting relationship with them, helping them understand their role and how they can support their child's learning. And then the second bullet point, do families understand the role that the district would expect them to play? And how is your district messaging these expectations to families? Are they really understanding what the school would hope that they would enter into as far as a role in supporting their child's education? And if not, how do you message that differently? I would say again, the importance of communicating effectively and developing those relationships with families first. Another point that Constantino brings forward in his book is to make it meaningful and relevant. So he says the key to effective engagement building family efficacy is to make experiences for families both meaningful and relevant. So think about how you are doing this at this time, and is it being effective? Is it the best way? So in his book, he's identified a number of different strategies per se. And we have pulled those out of the book and put them on this document. So one thing that he does bring forward is the weekly folder, which a lot of educators are familiar with, sending information home, right, to the family. So what he says is we need to change the focus to what will occur in the future so that parents can engage in the learning. Rather than sending home what has already happened in the classroom, we need to talk about what we're going to be focusing on in the classroom in the upcoming week and provide maybe some different strategies for families to support that learning at home, or at least have a conversation with their child about what they're learning in the classroom. And I mentioned learning at home, so that need for family support for home learning. How can they reinforce those concepts? Also, he also talks more about information that is sent home. how important it is to personalize activities and explain how this activity will positively affect their child, and also to provide specific information so that families can ask their children those questions that I talked about, like tell me more about, show me, and teach me about what they're doing in the classroom currently. So this again is another document you can use, another concept you can keep in mind, making it meaningful and relevant for families. Another thing that Dr. Constantino brings forward in his book is this concept of invisible engagement. So he says, we often consider family engagement as activities that happen at school. But consider for a moment that promoting the efficacy of families relies on those types of activities that we inspire at the school level, but may not see. And those are things that are happening in the home and the community. And it's exactly what we've talked about is how can you support a family to reinforce the learning at home or reinforce it during their daily routines. One example of this is if the family likes to cook together. Can some math concepts come into play there? Something they're learning in the classroom that can be reinforced at home when they're cooking or gardening or whatever they like to do together during their daily routines. So he goes on to say here, ask about activities that occur in the home and community and how they may be engaging the student in a way that supports their learning at school. Kind of exactly what I said. So considering that invisible engagement, you don't see it, but it's happening because you've inspired it as a teacher and they're following through with it at home and in the community. So as I said earlier, we're going to hear from Jim Addison and Molly Teeland. They are literacy specialists at CESA 3, and they're going to talk to us today about the importance of literacy in building up family efficacy around literacy and especially early literacy. And they're going to focus on a few different points. One is reading to your child or to a child. Primarily, absolutely, we want families reading to their children, but that could also take place if the child engages in the library, or maybe they're at a friend's house and they're engaging in the same type of activity where somebody is reading to them. But just bringing forward the importance of reading to a child where they can develop greater oral language, they can listen to stories, they can experience richer text, and they do kind of exploration, right, through that storytelling of someone reading to them. And they can learn more about a concept and the words associated with that concept. Also, they're going to bring forward understanding of how to support decoding skills that are being taught and learned in the classroom. So again, really important for families to understand what's being taught in the classroom so they can reinforce that at home. That also includes choosing the right books to be reading with your child at home if you're really going to be working on and supporting or reinforcing those coding skills. And then they talk about how all this support kind of threads together to eventually have language comprehension and reading fluency. And then they'll talk about some resources that can be used and shared. So let's listen in to Jim and Molly in regard to early literacy.
Everyone, thank you for joining us for our presentation today. My name is Molly Teelan, and I am joined by my literacy colleague, Jim Addison. And we are going to talk today about text selection and purpose in early literacy. We're just going to talk about different types of text and how they fit into the world of literacy. So I will hand it over to Jim to get us started.
All right, so you may be familiar with the simple view of reading, especially if you've completed a CESA-approved training for Act 20. But just to make sure and kind of refamiliarize ourselves with this, so the simple view of reading is really it's a theory or a theoretical framework in reading to show what's important for students to be able to make meaning and comprehend text. So the simple, which maybe isn't fully simple view of reading, is decoding, which is our ability to effortlessly and accurately read words, times language comprehension. So that's all aspects of language really fall under this umbrella. Both of those are completely necessary for reading comprehension. So we're going to kind of break that into today's presentation and how different types of text are fueled in these areas.
Okay, so as we think about that simple view, so that decoding and language comprehension, we want to bring to light some texts that are available for children to read. One term that you are probably familiar with is decodable text. And so when we define decodable text, those are controlled text that fall within a systematic phonics program. So the words that students are going to encounter are aligned to the skills that student has been taught. So they should be able to read those using the knowledge that they have from the program. Then we also have authentic text, which are uncontrolled text that have just a wider a range of language and vocabulary and plot that we also want students to access because that will advance their language comprehension skills. So we kind of think about them fitting into two buckets. The decodable readers help our students to build those decoding skills. Those authentic text help to build our students' language comprehension skills.
So both of those are super, super important, as Molly alluded to. And one text we do want to avoid that is a predictable text. So if our purpose is really to build the decoding skills of our early readers, a text like this can sometimes encourage students to guess. So in this example that we see here, I am a, typically is repetitive. I am a, and the child can use the picture to identify what the word is. I live in, and then they finish based on maybe the picture or some guessing. And so this is a type of text in those early years, those foundational years that we would want to avoid.
So when we think about decodable, so what I had referenced prior, this is an example of what a decodable text would be. I'll just read the first section. A fish came up to the sheep stuck his nose in. And when you're looking at this, you might notice that there are quite a few digraphs. So that SH, those two letters making one sound, is what this student is probably working on. And then all of the other skills that are included in this decodable text, they have been taught prior. So that short I sound in fish or the short U sound in up, those are things that they have been introduced to, as well as in sheep, the EE making that long E sound, they should also have been taught, again, in their systematic and explicit phonics instruction. So this is something that we would see students doing in the classroom and making sure that they are aligned to the skills that they are being taught.
Okay, next we have a video where a parent was sitting with their child and they had sort of this predictable text. So we're going to kind of watch and see sort of the differences and why we do want to avoid predictable text. So we'll hit play here and give you just a short snippet.
I think my for a good swing. Mm-hmm. Purple.
Okay. So you may be watching that and like, okay, that sounds really good. The child is sounding out the word, right? They're very accurate. And I would agree, right? That seems like some really great reading that's happening. However, this parent in this experiment decided to do the same thing, except now hid the pictures. So we're going to fast forward and just look at that same sentence again.
I expect my for a good swing up.
Okay, great.
All right, so substantially different as you can see. So we're not saying that pictures are bad and that pictures don't help to tell a story. But what we're saying is if our goal in this instance is really to focus on those decoding skills at those early ages, that we have to make sure that is with text and that children are focusing specifically on the words and decoding the words.
All right. So then when we think about authentic text, so those uncontrollable text that we are encouraging you to read aloud with your children or with children, here are a few examples from my own personal life. We have a 3-year-old, and these are a few of our favorite books that we read aloud. So the first one, Owl Moon, and the second, Miss Rumphius. And so the reason I really appreciate these books is just the language structure that they have. So they have complex sentences and some simple sentences thrown in there. We also have just a variety of vocabulary experiences, vocabulary that is not in my everyday language that I get to expose him to. The story itself is well written. It follows like the plot is great. The character development is enjoyable. And as I've shared in the past, I have this belief that any good book for a child is also, or for an adult is also a good book for a child. So as the reader of these books, you should enjoy them and enjoy the experience of reading with your child.
But also like to talk about another theoretical framework in literacy, and that is Scarborough's reading rope. So a little more expansive than what we saw with the simple view of reading. But I also want to show you that the simple view of reading is really embedded in here. So if you look at the screen on the top, you see language comprehension and all of those different strands that make up language. And then on the bottom, we see word recognition or decoding. And that really includes, again, where a child is sounding out and reading those words in those decodable text. So the biggest thing I want to point out to you is that all of these are necessary and all of these really weave together to help students to become really strong, skilled readers and really to be able to understand and comprehend the text that they're reading.
Within this Scarborough's reading rope on the top that Jim talked about, that language comprehension, the authentic text that we are recommending for being read aloud by parents is really focusing on this upper strand here. So these authentic texts will help to build students' background knowledge, again, their vocabulary that they will be introduced to, the different sentence structures, a lot of metaphors, similes, just figurative language there, and then just like concepts of print and literacy knowledge, whether that's like fiction, nonfiction, how to read a book, and those sorts of things as well. So those authentic texts that we are encouraging you will build students' skills and these substrands that will work together to build a proficient reader.
One caution to think about is in those really early grades where we are reading texts that are maybe fairly simple based on where the child is at in their reading abilities, that a child really is going to lean on their word reading abilities and that their language abilities maybe aren't, it's not that they're not important, but they're maybe not as needed to really do well with those types of texts. Then as we increase in grades and as students get older, their word reading abilities become a little less important, still important and crucial, but language sort of takes over as really what is completely necessary to help comprehend and understand text. Now, sometimes we get in this idea, though, that we shouldn't really start by digging into oral language and some of those higher level language skills until a child can read. And Louisa Moat says that's not the case, that we really should focus on language comprehension long before a child can read a text on their own. So where literacy really begins is actually in the 3rd trimester. So we're really trying to encourage, trying to get really a lot of opportunities for parents to engage with rich text at the earliest ages. So we have just a few resources for you to consider. This one is a podcast by Sonia Cabell, who is a recent author of a text called Strive for Five. And in this podcast by Amplify, she really digs into language comprehension and makes those connections back to Scarborough's reading rope. So one recommendation we have. And another recommendation we have is Reading Rockets, which you may be very familiar with. There's tons of resources on here, blogs, articles, and this is one that stood out that we thought really connected well with our presentation today. And this is a blog that discusses the importance and the benefits of reading with your child, but then also provides some strategies and information to equip parents with supporting their child in reading these texts, like active reading in this video example.
And our last recommendation is just a website that is called Everyday Reading. On this website, the author has a bunch of book lists that are available. So you can search by content, you can search by age. So if you are looking for a place to start, if you're not sure like what is an authentic text and you're like, how can I have some ideas or get just a starting place to launch from, I would recommend checking out Everyday Reading and looking at her book list there. So thank you all for joining us for our presentation. If you have any questions, Caroline will know where to point you. But again, I am Molly Thielen, and this is my colleague, Jim Addison.
Okay, so Jim and Molly shared a lot of great information about
Everyone, thank you for joining us.
early literacy. Sorry about that. And here on the next slide, I have linked in the resources that they spoke about. Again, building up the family's efficacy to be able to support those learning goals outside of school, at the home, and in the community. And all these resources they provided and the information that they gave can help families be and fill that role at home and in the community to support their child. So back to Dr. Steven Constantino. So a few other things he says just about family engagement. He states the fact that family engagement is not optional. It's going to happen whether it's positive, negative, or otherwise, right? So thinking about family engagement in your school or district, think about what you want. What kind of family engagement do you want, not only in your school, but in your classroom? And what are you willing to do to get what you want? He talks about the need to maybe change some things, change the way you do things, the way you outreach to families. He also goes on to say, you gotta wanna, right? So your personal desire to make a difficult change, or I would say any change, really starts with the very simple notion that the change is something you desire. So if you desire to build stronger relationships with families and help you to support their child, think about maybe some possible ways and strategies you could implement. He also goes on to say there's a need for leadership. So definitely at a systems level, you need leadership that is strong, committed, courageous, because it's essential to long-term success. So leaders need to acknowledge that change needs to happen. They have to have the will to make the change, which can be difficult to make a system change. They have to be willing to face and overcome any fear or fear of the unknown. What's going to really happen when we try to do this? And then they're responsible for creating the conditions for engagement within the school. But you as an individual could do this in your classroom as well, just with families of the students you have in your classroom. And it may take those 4 points that I just brought forward from Dr. Constantino for you to make that individual change as well. So what are your next steps? Well, you can contact me, Caroline Rossing at CESA 3. We could talk more about family engagement and the materials and information in this session as well as the other sessions. We also have numerous other resources and information available. You can take what you learn and talk to others in your district or in your school and think about how you might be able to use or apply it. You could actually review some of your district family engagement data and other relevant data and disaggregate it and analyze it and think about, okay, it'll really help you to get a focus for what step to take next. You could buy the Engage Every Family book and share and dive into a book study, and I could help you with that as well. And then you could review Dr. Steven Constantino's website information and resources. Not only has he written a number of books, but he has an online platform. He's got a website and he does online teaching around family engagement and changes at the systemic or system level and or personal level. So you could reach out and take a look at his results-oriented family engagement webpage. The second bullet on this slide talks about practical applications for classroom teachers. It's a great document that he developed. And he's also got a blog site. That's the first bullet point with a lot of great information on it. So being that there are no questions today, I want to thank you again for attending and hope that your family engagement initiatives fall into place. So thank you again.